guys, tonight we begin with something a little quieter, a little sadder, and unfortunately for the people involved, very real. Tonight, we're going to spend some time with a Roman slave girl, not a famous empress, not a powerful senator, not a victorious general standing dramatically on a hill while inspirational music plays in the background. No, we are following one of the millions of people who existed underneath all that glory, the people who swept the floors, the people who carried the water, the people who cooked the meals, the people whose names barely survived history. So dim the lights, get comfortable, maybe grab a blanket, and together, let's drift back nearly 2,000 years to the Roman Empire, a place famous for roads, aqueducts, giant arenas, and an absolutely astonishing ability to convince generations of schoolchildren that everyone spent their days wearing clean white togas and discussing philosophy. The reality was considerably dustier. And for a slave girl, life was usually hard from the moment she opened her eyes each morning until the moment exhaustion finally pulled her into sleep, if she was lucky. And in Roman history, luck was often in short supply. Imagine waking up before sunrise, not because you want to, not because your alarm went off, not because you've decided to become one of those productive morning people who somehow enjoy seeing the sunrise. No, you wake up because someone else owns your time. Someone else owns your labor. And technically, someone else owns you. Our slave girl might be 12 years old, maybe 14, perhaps younger. Roman slavery did not wait for adulthood. It did not politely allow children to become adults first. Many slaves entered Roman households as children and spent their entire lives serving families who considered them property. It's a harsh word, property, but that's exactly how Roman law viewed slaves, not citizens, not workers, not employees, property. Legally speaking, a wealthy Roman might own a slave in much the same way he owned a chair, a horse, or an olive tree. Of course, humans are not chairs. Humans have feelings, dreams, fears, and inconvenient tendencies to remain human even when legal systems insist otherwise, which created all sorts of tensions throughout Roman society. But our slave girl does not have much time to think about philosophy this morning. She has work to do. The house is already stirring. And wealthy Roman households could be surprisingly busy places. A large urban home might contain dozens of slaves, sometimes hundreds, each performing specialized tasks. Some cooked, some cleaned, some taught children, some managed finances, some served at dinner parties, some carried messages, some worked as personal attendants, and some, unfortunately, existed near the very bottom of the hierarchy. Our girl likely belongs somewhere down there, close to the endless chores, close to the dirt, close to the work nobody else wants. She might begin her day by cleaning, and then cleaning some more. Because ancient cities were filthy places, Roman writers loved boasting about civilization. They loved talking about baths, roads, architecture, engineering. And to be fair, Rome accomplished remarkable things. But cities filled with humans, animals, smoke, mud, and open waste systems tend to become messy rather quickly. Someone had to remove that mess. And very often, that someone was a slave. So before sunrise, she sweeps floors, carries water, empties containers, washes surfaces, polishes household items. And all of this happens while trying not to attract negative attention, which may sound easy. It was not. Roman households operated on hierarchy. Everyone knew their place. Everyone understood who could give orders, and slaves lived under constant observation. A mistake could be embarrassing. A larger mistake could lead to punishment. And punishment varied tremendously depending on the household. Some owners were relatively mild. Others treated cruelty as a personality trait. Because unfortunately, being wealthy does not automatically make people kind. History offers endless evidence of that particular lesson. and Rome provides plenty more. As morning arrives, the household begins waking. The master's children may need assistance dressing. The mistress may require attendance. Breakfast preparations begin, tasks multiply, the pace quickens. And our slave girl moves constantly. One fascinating detail about Roman slavery is how deeply it penetrated daily life. Romans became accustomed to having servants available for nearly everything. Need help putting on shoes? A slave. Need someone to carry a message? A slave. Need someone to prepare food? A slave. Need someone to hold a mirror while you arrange your hair? Believe it or not, also a slave. The Roman elite became remarkably skilled at inventing tasks for other people to perform. An impressive talent, really. If laziness were an Olympic event, some Roman aristocrats might have achieved legendary status. Our slave girl, meanwhile, receives no medals, only more work. And perhaps that's the most important thing to understand. For many slaves, life wasn't defined by one enormous tragedy. It was defined by thousands of small, exhausting moments. The endless repetition, the endless obedience, the endless awareness that your future depends on someone else's decisions, day after day. Year after year, sometimes for an entire lifetime. Now let's float gently into another corner of Roman life. Because not every slave girl worked inside a comfortable urban home. Some lived in the countryside. And rural slavery could be even harsher. Roman agriculture depended heavily on slave labor. Massive estates stretched across the landscape, producing grain, wine, olives, and wealth, lots and lots of wealth, which mostly flowed upward, as wealth tends to do. Slave girl born into rural labor might spend long days working fields, harvesting crops, carrying loads, preparing food for workers, caring for animals, or assisting with countless agricultural tasks. Life followed the rhythm of seasons, summer heat, winter cold, planting, harvesting, repeating forever. And unlike household slaves, agricultural workers often lived farther from public visibility, which sometimes meant fewer protections. Not that legal protections were especially strong to begin with. Still, distance could make conditions even worse. Ancient authors occasionally described slave barracks, crowded accommodations, basic food, long labor hours. It was not exactly the lifestyle package featured in luxury travel brochures. Then again, experience authentic Roman agricultural labor probably wouldn't attract many tourists, even in the 1st century. As our story continues, let's think about something else. Identity, because slavery affected nearly every part of a person's identity. Many slave girls arrived from conquered territories: Gaul, Greece, Britain, North Africa, the Near East. The Roman Empire was enormous, and conquest constantly supplied new slaves. Some were prisoners of war, others were sold through trade networks, some were born into slavery, meaning our slave girl might not even speak Latin as her first language. Imagine being taken far from home, far from family, far from everything familiar, then growing up inside a household where your language slowly fades. Your traditions fade, your memories fade. History often focuses on kings and battles, but cultural loss like this happened quietly, millions of times, one person at a time. And it's difficult not to feel sympathy for those forgotten lives, especially the children. Roman literature occasionally preserves tiny glimpses of them, brief references, small observations, scattered evidence, enough to remind us they existed, enough to remind us they mattered, even if history rarely wrote down their stories. As the afternoon arrives, our slave girl's work continues. Meals must be prepared, laundry must be washed, water must be carried, children must be supervised, errands must be completed. Everything depends on labor, and labor never really ends. Ancient life was physically demanding for almost everyone, but slavery added another layer: the absence of control, the absence of choice. Perhaps that's the hardest part to imagine. not simply working hard. Humans have always worked hard. It is working hard without freedom, without ownership of your own future, without certainty that tomorrow will be any different. And yet, people adapted, because humans are remarkably resilient creatures, even in terrible circumstances. Slave communities formed friendships, shared stories, built relationships, fell in love, raised children, found moments of laughter, found moments of hope. Life continued. It always does, even under difficult conditions. And that persistence may be one of the most extraordinary aspects of human history, the ability to keep going, even when circumstances suggest otherwise. As evening approaches, the wealthy members of the household prepare for dinner, and Roman dinners could become elaborate affairs. Guests arrive, food appears, conversations begin, displays of status unfold. Everyone tries very hard to impress everyone else, a tradition that has survived remarkably well into modern times. Some things never change. For slave attendants, however, dinner meant even more work, serving food, pouring wine, cleaning dishes, responding instantly to requests, remaining attentive for hours, standing quietly in the background while elite Romans debated politics, philosophy, poetry, or whatever happened to interest them that evening. Imagine hearing endless discussions about freedom and virtue while being legally classified as property. That must have produced some interesting internal commentary, though expressing it aloud would have been unwise, very unwise. Eventually the guests leave, the dishes disappear, the household quiets, and finally, after countless tasks, our slave girl approaches the end of her day. She is tired, very tired, the kind of tired that settles into your bones, the kind that arrives after hours of physical labor. Tomorrow will likely look similar, the day after that too, and the day after that. For now, though, sleep arrives, a brief escape, a few precious hours where hierarchy temporarily disappears, where masters and slaves alike drift into dreams. And somewhere in ancient Rome, one exhausted girl closes her eyes, not knowing what tomorrow will bring, only knowing that morning always comes quickly and work always waits. And that is where we'll gently pause for tonight's first journey through the life of a Roman slave girl. As the night deepens and the lamps of ancient Rome flicker softly in the distance, let's continue our journey. Our slave girl is asleep, or at least trying to be. Ancient houses were not especially quiet places. People snored, animals made noise, doors creaked, Barbies cried, somewhere a dog barked. Somewhere else a drunk Roman citizen was probably making very questionable life choices. Civilization changes. Human behavior, surprisingly, does not. Eventually morning returns. Because history is relentless like that, the sun rises, the chores return, and our slave girl grows a little older. One thing modern people sometimes forget is that childhood itself was different in the ancient world. Today we often imagine childhood as a protected stage of life: school, games, toys, cartoons, bedtimes, complaints about homework. In ancient Rome, many children moved into adult responsibilities frighteningly early. For slave children, this happened even faster. A girl of 10 or 12 might already be handling duties that modern adults would consider demanding. She learns quickly, because she has to. Learning is not optional. Mistakes have consequences, and consequences tend to be powerful teachers. Soon she understands how every member of the household likes things done. The master prefers his sandals arranged in a certain place. The mistress dislikes wrinkles in clothing. One child wants food immediately, another throws tantrums. A third refuses to cooperate with absolutely anything. Ancient children, it turns out, possessed many of the same talents modern children possess, particularly the talent for creating chaos. Our slave girl navigates all of this daily. She becomes observant, quiet, careful, she learns to read moods, to predict tempers, to avoid conflict whenever possible. These are survival skills, and many enslaved people became extraordinarily skilled at them. A wealthy Roman might imagine he controlled everything. Slaves often understood the household far better than its owners did. They knew who secretly disliked whom, who argued, who overspent, who drank too much, who cried after everyone else went to bed, who worried constantly about reputation, who feared losing status. Every household has secrets. Large Roman households simply had more witnesses. Now, as our girl enters her teenage years, another reality begins to emerge. And unfortunately, it is one of the darker aspects of Roman slavery. Because female slaves occupied an especially vulnerable position, Roman society was intensely hierarchical. Gender mattered, status mattered, wealth mattered, and slavery placed someone near the bottom of all those systems at once. Female slaves often faced dangers that male slaves did not experience in the same way. They could become targets for exploitation, targets for unwanted attention, targets for the whims of people with power over them. Ancient sources do not always discuss this openly. Roman writers often preferred to look away from uncomfortable realities, a habit humanity has maintained with impressive consistency. But enough evidence survives to paint a troubling picture. Many slave girls lived with constant uncertainty, constant awareness that their personal boundaries mattered very little under Roman law. It's one of those historical realities that feels painfully modern in some ways. Power imbalances rarely produce good outcomes. Ancient Rome was no exception. Still, daily life continued. Because daily life always continues, the bread still needed baking, the water still needed carrying, the floors still needed sweeping. History is strange that way. Even during difficult circumstances, most people spend most of their time doing ordinary things: cooking, cleaning, working, talking, waiting. Life rarely feels historic when you're living it. Now let's drift toward something slightly different: friendship. Because even under slavery, people formed relationships. Humans are social creatures. We seek companionship almost automatically. In a household with dozens of slaves, friendships naturally developed. Perhaps our girl becomes close to another servant, maybe someone older, someone who has spent 20 years in the household, someone who remembers previous masters, previous children, previous scandals. Every workplace has that one employee who knows absolutely everything. Ancient Roman households were no different. Imagine sitting together after work, speaking quietly, sharing stories. Complaining about difficult employers, a timeless tradition, one that has survived thousands of years remarkably intact. Perhaps they exchange gossip. Perhaps they talk about freedom. Many slaves dreamed about manumission, the legal process through which a slave could become free. Not every slave achieved it, far from it, but it remained possible, and that possibility mattered. A household slave who served faithfully for many years might eventually receive freedom from an owner. Some masters included emancipation in their wills, others granted it during their lifetime. The motivations varied: generosity, practicality, reputation, sometimes guilt. Humans are complicated creatures, even Roman aristocrats, so our girl might dream about freedom, might imagine having her own home someday, making her own decisions, owning her own belongings, choosing where she walks, choosing when she sleeps, things most free people barely think about. Because freedom often becomes most visible when it is absent. As the years pass, she also witnesses something fascinating: the Roman obsession with status. Now, Romans loved status. They adored it, collected it, displayed it, compared it, measured it, talked about it endlessly. If social ranking were an Olympic sport, Rome would have dominated the medal count. Every detail mattered: clothing, jewelry, family history, political connections, dinner guests. property, everything became a signal. And because our slave girl works inside elite households, she observes this strange competition up close. One family buys a larger villa, another family hosts a more extravagant banquet, a senator acquires expensive artwork, someone else commissions a giant statue of himself, because apparently having one version of yourself wasn't enough. The irony, of course, is that many wealthy Romans spent enormous energy trying to impress other wealthy Romans. Meanwhile, the people maintaining their lifestyles remained largely invisible. Our girl notices this, perhaps not consciously at first, but over time she sees patterns, the endless striving, the endless competition, the endless anxiety. Even powerful people are often unhappy. History provides abundant examples. Some emperors controlled vast territories and still managed to be miserable. Quite an achievement when you think about it. Let's float gently forward again. Now our slave girl is perhaps 17. Maybe 18, no longer a child, not fully secure either. Life expectancy in the ancient world was lower than today. Disease was common, medical knowledge was limited. Infections could become deadly, childbirth carried significant risks. A simple illness could change everything. This uncertainty shaped how people thought about life. Romans understood mortality intimately. Death was not hidden away, it was present, visible, familiar. And slaves often suffered even more from poor health conditions. Nutrition varied. Workloads remained heavy. Medical treatment depended entirely on circumstance. A wealthy household might provide reasonable care for valuable servants. Others might not bother. Again, much depended on the character of the owner, which is not exactly the foundation of a fair system. Imagine your future health depending entirely on whether another person feels generous, not ideal. As adulthood arrives, marriage becomes another possibility, though slavery complicated everything. Legally recognized Roman marriages required freedom. Slaves could form relationships, they could live as couples, they could raise children together, but these unions lacked the same legal protections. A slave couple could be separated, sold apart, transferred. Families lived with uncertainty, and uncertainty leaves scars. Yet people still loved, still formed attachments, still built lives together, because even oppressive systems cannot fully erase human connection. People find ways, they always have, and perhaps our slave girl falls in love, maybe with another household servant, maybe with a craftsman, maybe with someone who shares her dream of eventual freedom. Their future remains uncertain. But then again, most futures are. Ancient Romans simply experienced that uncertainty more directly. Now evening settles once more over the city. Oil lamps glow. The streets quiet slightly. Though quiet in Rome remained a relative concept. Large cities have always been noisy. Ancient cities included wagon wheels, animals, merchants, arguments, celebrations, and the occasional person making terrible decisions after too much wine. Some traditions are eternal. Our slave girl finishes another long day. Perhaps she pauses briefly in a courtyard, looks toward the stars, feels the cool night air. A small moment, nothing dramatic, nothing historic. Just a human being existing beneath the same sky we see today. And perhaps that's one of the most remarkable things about history. The distance feels enormous. 2,000 years, entire empires rising and falling, languages changing, technologies transforming. Yet some experiences remain familiar. Exhaustion, friendship, hope, loneliness, dreams about a better future. Those feelings cross centuries surprisingly well. And somewhere in ancient Rome, a young slave woman drifts towards sleep, wondering what tomorrow might bring, wondering whether freedom will ever arrive, wondering whether life can become something more than endless service, questions without easy answers. questions millions of people have asked throughout history. The night passes, the stars slowly fade, and somewhere in the vast sprawl of ancient Rome, our slave girl wakes once again before sunrise, not because she is well rested, not because she has suddenly developed a passion for early mornings, but because Roman households do not run themselves. A shocking revelation, I know. The city around her is still dark. Most citizens are asleep. Most senators are asleep. Most wealthy aristocrats are definitely asleep. Many of them are probably dreaming about becoming even wealthier, a hobby they pursued with remarkable dedication, but the slaves are already moving. A household servant's day often began long before the people she served even opened their eyes. And today, let's spend some time looking beyond the house itself, because our slave girl lives in Rome, the largest city in the empire, possibly the largest city in the world. A place so enormous that visitors from smaller towns sometimes found it overwhelming. Imagine arriving from a quiet village and suddenly encountering hundreds of thousands of people, perhaps even 1 million crowded streets. Towering buildings, constant noise, markets, temples, shops, animals, smoke, dust, and people everywhere, endless people. Ancient Rome was many things. Clean and peaceful were not among them. As dawn arrives, our girl begins her first errands. She may be sent to fetch water, and this alone could consume a significant portion of the morning. Now, Rome famously possessed aqueducts, magnificent engineering achievements, truly impressive. Roman engineers deserve plenty of credit. The problem is that having water arrive in a city and having water conveniently available inside every home are two different things. Many households still required servants to carry water for daily use. So our girl takes jars, leaves the house, and enters the awakening city. The streets are already growing busy. Merchants prepare stalls. Workers hurry toward jobs. Bakers begin producing bread. Animals crowd narrow roads. Somewhere, somebody is already arguing. Ancient cities appear to have generated arguments naturally. Like weather, like gravity, like taxes, some things never change. As she walks, she sees every layer of Roman society. The wealthy riding comfortably, the poor searching for work, freedmen conducting business, foreign traders selling goods from distant lands, former soldiers, laborers, craftsmen, beggars, priests, politicians. Rome contained everyone, or at least it felt that way. The empire stretched across 3 continents. And pieces of that enormous world flowed through its capital every day. Spices from the east, grain from Egypt, wine from Spain, marble from Greece, exotic animals from Africa. The city consumed resources at a staggering scale, and much of that system ultimately rested upon labor performed by ordinary people, including slaves, especially slaves. As our girl carries water back through crowded streets, she likely develops one important skill: getting out of everyone's way. Because Rome was not designed for convenience, the streets could be chaotic, traffic became notorious, noise filled the air, and moving through crowds required patience or determination, or both. Roman writers frequently complained about city life. They complained about noise, crowds, construction, traffic, neighbors, street vendors, and pretty much everything else. Human beings have apparently enjoyed complaining about cities for thousands of years, another timeless tradition. Back at the household, breakfast preparations continue. Food must be served, utensils cleaned, children supervised, tasks multiply endlessly. The remarkable thing about domestic labor is how invisible it becomes when done properly. If everything functions smoothly, nobody notices. If something goes wrong, everyone notices. Our slave girl learns this lesson quickly. A forgotten task attracts attention. A completed task disappears into the background. Success often means remaining unseen. And many enslaved people spent years mastering exactly that. Now let's drift into one of the stranger aspects of Roman life. Because despite all the hardship, some slaves became highly educated, not all certainly, but enough to surprise modern audiences. Many wealthy Romans employed educated Greek slaves as teachers, secretaries, tutors, accountants, physicians, administrative assistants. Some enslaved individuals possessed more education than the citizens who owned them, an awkward situation. Imagine being legally owned by someone less informed than you. History occasionally enjoys irony. For female slaves, educational opportunities were more limited, but not entirely absent. A household servant working closely with elite children might learn reading, writing, basic arithmetic, social customs, knowledge absorbed indirectly through observation. Living inside wealthy households exposed slaves to information constantly. Our girl may never attend a formal school, yet she learns every day watching. Listening, remembering, because knowledge can travel in surprising ways, especially when survival depends on paying attention. As afternoon approaches, the Roman heat begins to build, and Roman summers could be brutal. Stone buildings trapped warmth, crowded streets intensified discomfort. Work continued regardless. There was no air conditioning, no electric fans, no convenient escape from the weather, just heat, lots of heat. Imagine carrying water, preparing food, cleaning rooms, running errands. All while temperatures climb higher and higher. Not exactly ideal working conditions, yet millions endured it because they had little choice. And perhaps this is where modern people can easily underestimate ancient life. Even routine tasks demanded more effort, more physical labor, more time. Simple activities required planning. Food preparation alone could consume hours. Laundry was exhausting. Travel was slow. Water was heavy. Everything demanded energy. Conveniences we take for granted would have seemed miraculous, though Roman aristocrats probably would have found new reasons to complain anyway. History suggests they were quite talented at that. Now let's spend a moment with another reality of slavery. Fear, not constant terror, not dramatic movie-style fear, something quieter, more persistent. The fear of uncertainty. Our slave girl may not know what next year looks like, or next month, or even next week. Owners could sell slaves, transfer them, gift them, reassign them. A familiar household could suddenly disappear, friends could vanish, relationships could end, not because of personal decisions, but because someone else made a choice. Imagine building a life while knowing so much remains outside your control. That uncertainty shaped every aspect of existence, and it helps explain why freedom mattered so profoundly. Freedom meant stability, choice, ownership, agency, things that many free Romans barely considered. Because people often notice privileges only when they lose them, or never possess them at all. As evening approaches, our girl accompanies members of the household into public spaces, perhaps the market, perhaps a temple, perhaps public baths. Now, slaves frequently accompanied their owners throughout daily activities. They carried belongings, provided assistance, handled practical concerns, and remained close by whenever needed. This creates a curious situation. A slave girl sees parts of Roman life that many ordinary people never experience. She enters wealthy neighborhoods, observes political discussions, witnesses social gatherings, listens to conversations among elites. She exists close to power, yet remains excluded from it, near enough to observe, far enough to never participate. It's a strange position, and probably a lonely one at times. Imagine spending years around luxury while owning nothing, years around privilege while possessing none, years around freedom while lacking it yourself. The contrast would be difficult to ignore. Still, life continues, because life always continues. The sun begins to set, golden light spills across rooftops. The city slowly transitions toward evening. Merchants close stalls, families gather, workers head home. The endless motion of Rome softens slightly, not entirely. A city this large never truly sleeps, but it slows, at least a little. Back at the house, more work awaits. There is always more work. Dinners require preparation, rooms require cleaning, clothing requires folding, children require supervision. The cycle continues, hour after hour, day after day, year after year. And perhaps tonight, after everyone else sleeps, our slave girl finds a few moments alone. Maybe she sits quietly in a courtyard. Maybe she looks upward. The same stars shine above her that shine above us now. The same moon drifts across the sky. Empires rise, empires fall, generations come and go. But some things remain surprisingly constant. For a brief moment, she can simply exist. Not as property, not as labor, not as a servant, just a person beneath the night sky. A young woman with worries, memories, dreams, and a future she cannot quite see. The city around her eventually grows quieter. The lamps burn lower, the household settles, and another exhausting Roman day finally reaches its end. Tomorrow will bring new chores, new challenges, new uncertainties. But for now, sleep arrives once more. The night settles gently over Rome. The city never becomes completely silent. A place this large always seems to produce noise from somewhere. A wagon rattling over stone, a distant conversation, a barking dog, a baby refusing to cooperate with the concept of sleep. Ancient life had many challenges, and apparently Barbies have always been one of them. Still, our slave girl manages to rest for a few hours, then morning returns, as it always does, and with it comes another day of work. Another day of carrying, cleaning, fetching, serving, waiting, watching, and obeying. As we continue tonight, let's talk about something our Roman slave girl possesses very little of: ownership. Because slavery wasn't simply about hard work. It wasn't simply about low status. It wasn't simply about long hours. At its core, slavery was about control, specifically control over a person's life. And one of the most powerful ways that control appeared was through ownership, or rather, the lack of it. Now imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering that almost nothing around you legally belongs to you. Not your room, not your clothing, not your earnings, perhaps not even your future. That was the reality many slaves faced. The tunic our girl wears may belong to her owner. The bed she sleeps on may belong to her owner. The tools she uses belong to her owner. Even the work of her own hands ultimately benefits someone else. It's a difficult concept for modern people to fully absorb. Because ownership quietly shapes our sense of independence. Even small possessions matter: a favorite book, a phone, a family photograph, a chair in a familiar room. These objects become part of our lives, part of our identity. For a Roman slave, that relationship with possessions could be fragile, yet humans are remarkably creative, and slaves often found ways to create small personal worlds within restrictive systems. Perhaps our girl keeps a tiny trinket, a bead, a charm, a piece of cloth. Something insignificant to everyone else, but precious to her, something that reminds her of home or family or happier memory. Archaeologists occasionally uncover objects like these, tiny personal belongings that survived centuries underground. Quiet reminders that ordinary people existed, that they loved things, missed things, remembered things just like us. As the morning continues, our girl joins the daily rhythm of household labor. The mistress requires assistance with clothing. The children require supervision. Food must be prepared. The floors somehow need cleaning again. An interesting mystery of human existence is how floors continuously become dirty. No matter the century, no matter the empire, no matter the technology, floors remain committed to their life purpose, which is apparently collecting dirt. Our girl sweeps patiently, perhaps while listening to conversations happening nearby. because servants often heard everything, and Roman families loved discussing family matters, inheritance disputes. Marriage arrangements, political ambitions, social rivalries, complaints, lots of complaints. A wealthy Roman household contained enough gossip to power an entire modern television network, sometimes much more. And while slaves rarely participated in those discussions, they certainly heard them, which meant they often understood family dynamics surprisingly well. Imagine spending years inside a household. You would quickly learn who secretly dislikes whom, who holds grudges, who worries constantly, spends too much money, who pretends to be wiser than they actually are, a skill that remains useful in every century. Now let's drift toward another aspect of Roman life, marriage. Because for free Roman women, marriage represented one of life's major transitions. Families arranged matches, dowries changed hands, political alliances formed, children eventually followed, at least in theory. Reality was often messier. Reality usually is. For slave women, however, marriage existed in a strange gray area. Roman law did not recognize formal marriages between slaves in the same way it recognized marriages between free citizens. Instead, many enslaved couples formed relationships called contubernium, essentially a partnership, a family, a shared life, but without full legal protection, which created obvious problems. A couple could spend years together, raise children together, build a life together, then suddenly be separated through sale or transfer. No court intervened. No legal safeguards existed. Everything depended on the wishes of the owner. Imagine trying to build a future while knowing it could disappear because of someone else's decision. That uncertainty hung over countless enslaved families. Yet despite this, people still fell in love, still formed attachments, still created homes wherever they could, because humans seem incapable of abandoning hope completely, even when circumstances make hope difficult. Perhaps our slave girl experiences this herself. Perhaps she begins exchanging conversations with another servant. Nothing dramatic, nothing cinematic. History rarely unfolds like a movie. More often it grows quietly, shared work, shared exhaustion, shared understanding. Maybe they meet while carrying supplies, maybe while cleaning after a banquet, maybe while performing some incredibly boring task. Many great romances probably began during incredibly boring tasks. Human beings are strange that way. Now let's move gently forward. The afternoon sun hangs high over Rome. The streets outside are crowded, merchants shout. Customers bargain, children run through alleys, animals wander exactly where they shouldn't. The city feels alive, busy, restless, and enormous. For someone born far away, Rome could seem almost unreal. Many slaves came from distant provinces. Some arrived from Britain, others from Gaul, Greece, North Africa, the Eastern Mediterranean. Places with different languages, different customs, different foods, different gods. And over time, many became absorbed into Roman society. But traces of their origins remained, a memory, an accent, a story passed between friends, a recipe remembered from childhood. History often talks about empires as political systems, but empires are also collections of human experiences, millions of people carrying pieces of their old lives into new places, sometimes willingly, sometimes not. Our slave girl may carry such memories too. Perhaps she remembers a mother, a village, a river, a language spoken long ago, or perhaps she was born into slavery and knows nothing else. Many enslaved people were. Entire generations grew up inside the system, never experiencing freedom firsthand, only hearing stories about it. Imagine hearing freedom described the way some people describe a distant country. Real yet somehow unreachable. Now evening begins approaching once again, and the household prepares for another dinner. The wealthy family gathers, guests may arrive. Conversation flows, wine is served, food appears, and behind it all stands an invisible workforce making everything possible. The cooks, the cleaners, the attendants, the servers, the slaves. History often remembers the banquet, not the people washing dishes afterward, but those people existed, and their lives mattered. Our girl moves quietly through the room, refilling cups, carrying plates, responding to requests, always attentive, always working. She hears philosophers discussing virtue, politicians discussing power, poets discussing beauty, and perhaps she finds some irony in all of it, though probably not out loud. Roman history contains many examples of people delivering speeches about morality while behaving terribly, a tradition that remains surprisingly durable. Eventually the evening ends, guests depart, the house grows quiet, the dishes are cleaned. Lamps dim, the long day finally concludes, and for a brief moment before sleep arrives, our girl is alone with her thoughts. Maybe she thinks about freedom, maybe she thinks about family, maybe she simply thinks about how tired she is. Exhaustion has a way of simplifying life. The future feels distant, tomorrow feels immediate, and tomorrow will arrive quickly, because tomorrow always arrives quickly. Above her, the Roman night stretches across the sky. Stars glitter softly over the world's greatest empire. The senators sleep, the merchants sleep, the soldiers sleep, the slaves sleep, at least for a few hours, and somewhere beneath those ancient stars, a young woman closes her eyes, a person history almost forgot, a person whose name may never reach us, yet a person whose life was every bit as real as those emperors and generals whose statues still stand in museums. The sun rises once again over Rome. Golden light spills across tiled rooftops. Smoke begins drifting from kitchens. Merchants unlock stalls. Bakers prepare bread. Citizens begin another day of conquering their personal problems. And somewhere inside a wealthy Roman household, our slave girl is already awake. Of course she is. The wealthy family is planning a banquet tonight, which means everyone below them is about to have a very long day. Banquets were one of the favorite hobbies of Rome's elite. Romans loved food, they loved wine, they loved showing off, and they especially loved showing off through food and wine. The combination proved irresistible. A senator might spend enormous sums organizing a dinner designed to impress guests, not because he needed to, not because it solved any particular problem, but because status had become something of a competitive sport. And tonight's banquet would be another round in that endless contest. For the guests, it would be an evening of entertainment. For the slaves, it would be a marathon. Our girl begins preparing long before anyone arrives. Vegetables must be cleaned, utensils arranged, tables organized, clothing prepared, rooms inspected. Every detail matters, because Roman elites took dining very seriously. Imagine planning a dinner party so elaborate that dozens of servants spend the entire day preparing it. That was not unusual. The wealthy had resources, and they intended to use them. As the morning progresses, the household becomes increasingly busy. Cooks move quickly through kitchens. Attendants carry supplies. Messengers arrive and depart. Everyone seems to have somewhere important to be, except perhaps the family cat. If the Romans had cats, which they did, and like modern cats, they probably contributed absolutely nothing to banquet preparations. A tradition cats have defended for thousands of years. Our slave girl works steadily, hour after hour, task after task. The remarkable thing about ancient labor is how physical everything was. Today, a machine might wash dishes, another machine might clean floors, another machine might preserve food. In Rome, human beings performed most of those jobs. Human muscles powered civilization, and slavery supplied many of those muscles. It's an uncomfortable truth. Some of Rome's greatest achievements rested upon systems that denied freedom to millions. History is often like that. Magnificent on the surface, complicated underneath. Now let's drift toward midday. The banquet is approaching. The master of the house grows anxious. Guests must be impressed. Everything must appear perfect. No mistakes. No embarrassment, no social disasters. Ancient aristocrats worried constantly about reputation. A successful banquet could increase prestige. An unsuccessful banquet could become gossip. And Roman gossip traveled faster than some official government messages. Imagine social media. Remove the internet. Add sandals. You've got something surprisingly close. Throughout the city, people discussed everyone else's business. And tonight's dinner would provide plenty of material. Our girl notices the tension. She has seen it before, the strange irony of wealth. The more status people possess, the more they worry about losing it. A senator fears rivals. A merchant fears bankruptcy. A noblewoman fears scandal. An ambitious politician fears obscurity. Everyone fears something. Freedom from worry appears to be one luxury nobody ever successfully purchased. As afternoon fades toward evening, guests begin arriving. The household transforms. Oil lamps glow warmly, fresh clothing appears, perfumes fill the air. Voices grow louder, laughter begins, the performance starts. Because banquets were performances, every detail communicated status. The food, the decorations, the guests, even the conversation, everything served a purpose, everything announced wealth. Our slave girl moves quietly through the gathering, almost invisible, almost. She pours wine, carries dishes, refills cups, responds immediately whenever called. A successful servant often disappeared into the background, present, necessary, yet somehow unseen. An odd contradiction. Now let's spend a few moments observing the guests, because Roman elites could be fascinating and occasionally ridiculous. One man boasts about his family history, another discusses politics, someone quotes poetry, someone else quotes philosophy, several pretend to understand topics they clearly do not understand. A timeless human tradition, and through it all, everyone attempts to appear intelligent, confident, important. The effort itself can be exhausting. Meanwhile, our girl continues working. She carries platters of food she may never taste, walks through conversations she may never join, observes a world that surrounds her but does not fully include her. There is something oddly lonely about that position, close enough to see everything, far enough to belong nowhere. Perhaps she notices a young guest, a free-born Roman girl around her own age. The two might be nearly identical in appearance, similar height, similar age, similar intelligence. Yet their lives are entirely different. One is free, one is not. And the difference between them exists not because of merit, not because of talent, not because of character, simply because history placed them on opposite sides of a legal boundary. A reminder that many advantages and disadvantages in life arrive through circumstance rather than choice. An uncomfortable lesson, but an important one. The banquet stretches into the evening. Moory wine flows. Conversations grow louder. Guests become increasingly confident about their opinions, which often happens when enough wine enters a room. Ancient Romans were no exception. Somewhere, an argument develops, nothing dramatic, just a disagreement about politics or philosophy or inheritance, or whose grandfather achieved something more impressive. The possibilities are endless. Human beings have always found creative reasons to argue. Our girl watches from the edges, quiet, observant. She has learned much over the years. How to predict moods, how to avoid trouble, how to recognize danger before it arrives. These skills rarely appear in history books, yet they helped countless people survive difficult lives. Finally, late into the night, the guests begin leaving. The performance ends, the masks relax. The grand evening concludes. And now comes the part nobody celebrates. Cleaning, the dishes remain, the spills remain, the mess remains. Banquets create memories for guests. they create extra work for servants. A girl joins the other household slaves. Together they restore order. Tables are cleared, floors are cleaned, utensils collected, lamps extinguished. One by one, the signs of luxury disappear. The illusion fades. By midnight, little remains, just exhaustion and silence. The wealthy family retires to comfortable rooms. The guests return home. The city grows darker, quieter. And our slave girl finally sits down, perhaps for the first time in hours. Her feet ache, her back aches, everything aches. Yet tomorrow another day awaits, another cycle, another sunrise, another collection of tasks. This is the rhythm of her life, not dramatic, not famous, not recorded by historians, yet deeply real. And perhaps that's why stories like hers matter, because most people in history were not emperors, not generals, not philosophers. They were workers, servants, parents, children, ordinary people trying to navigate difficult circumstances, people who laughed sometimes, complained sometimes, dreamed sometimes, and endured far more than we often realize. As the final lamps go dark, a girl closes her eyes. Outside, Rome sleeps beneath the stars, the greatest city in the empire, a city built by ambition, power, wealth, and an extraordinary amount of human labor. Tomorrow its streets will fill again. Tomorrow its markets will open again. Tomorrow its masters will give more orders. And tomorrow our story will continue. But for now, the night is quiet. And for a few precious hours, even a slave girl can rest. The night slips away. The stars fade above the rooftops of Rome. And somewhere in the soft gray light before dawn, our slave girl wakes once more. The city is quiet, at least by Roman standards. Which still means someone is moving furniture, a rooster is announcing himself to the universe, and a dog has found something important to bark at. Ancient peace was relative. Still, these moments before sunrise are among the calmest parts of her day. For a few minutes, before the household fully awakens, she belongs only to herself, not legally, of course. Rome would have disagreed with that statement immediately. Rome had many opinions. And one of its favorite opinions was deciding who belonged to whom. But in these quiet moments, before orders begin flying through the house, she can think her own thoughts. And sometimes that matters more than people realize. Because even in difficult lives, happiness occasionally sneaks in through small doors, not grand happiness, not life-changing happiness, just little moments, the kind history rarely records. Perhaps she enjoys the cool morning air. Perhaps she likes watching sunlight slowly reach the rooftops. Perhaps she exchanges a joke with another servant while carrying water, tiny things, but human lives are often built from tiny things. The grand events fill history books. The small moments fill actual lives. As the household wakes, the usual rhythm begins again. Footsteps, voices, doors opening, tasks multiplying, the familiar dance of service. Yet today feels slightly different, because over the years, our slave girl has developed friendships, real friendships. The sort that form when people spend thousands of hours together, working, complaining, laughing quietly when nobody important is listening. Friendship is one of humanity's oldest survival mechanisms. Give people enough hardship, and eventually they start forming alliances. Sometimes those alliances become families. Sometimes they become lifelong friendships. Sometimes they become both. And within the world of Roman slavery, these relationships mattered enormously because official support systems were limited. Protection often came from the people around you, the cook who shares food, the older servant who offers advice, the stable worker who watches out for trouble, the nursemaid who remembers everyone's birthdays. These small communities help people survive. Our girl has become part of one. And while that does not erase slavery, it makes life more bearable, which is not the same thing as happiness, but it is something, and sometimes something is enough. let's drift gently into the middle of the morning. Today, the household children are particularly energetic, an unfortunate development for everyone involved. Children possess remarkable reserves of energy. Ancient children apparently possessed exactly the same reserves. The youngest boy refuses to sit still. The oldest girl complains about lessons. Someone spills food. Someone starts crying. Someone blames someone else. Within minutes, chaos has arrived. A familiar guest in every century, our slave girl helps manage the situation. She has watched these children grow up. She knows their habits, their fears, their favorite games, their favorite excuses. In some ways, she may know them better than their own parents do, which creates one of the strange contradictions of slavery. Many enslaved women spent years caring for children, teaching them, protecting them, comforting them, watching them mature. Yet legally they remained outsiders, trusted, needed, even loved, but never fully equal. History contains many relationships like this. Relationships that do not fit neatly into categories. Human emotions rarely follow legal definitions, and Roman households were full of emotional complications. Now let's float forward into the afternoon. The heat settles over the city. Work slows slightly, not because there's less work, because the weather demands it. Ancient Romans understood something modern office culture occasionally forgets. Extreme heat makes people miserable, and miserable people work poorly. A lesson that should probably be carved onto a monument somewhere. Our girl completes her tasks and briefly joins a few other servants in a shaded courtyard. Just for a moment, a short pause, a rare break. The conversation wanders. Someone shares gossip. Someone tells a story. Someone complains about aching feet. The universal language of workers throughout history. Perhaps one older servant begins talking about freedom. Because every household seems to have someone who knows a person who knew a person who became free, stories circulate. A former slave who opened a shop, another who became wealthy, another who purchased property, another who married and started a family. Whether every detail is true hardly matters. The stories themselves provide hope, and hope is valuable, especially when reality feels difficult. Our girl listens carefully because she dreams about freedom, not constantly, not every hour. Life is too busy for that, but the dream remains, a small flame, never completely extinguished. Imagine owning your own future, choosing where you live, keeping the money you earn, making decisions without permission. To many Romans, these things felt ordinary. To a slave, they could seem extraordinary. It's often the simplest freedoms that become most precious. Now let's wander into another corner of Roman life, religion. Because religion surrounded nearly every aspect of Roman society. Temples stood throughout the city, festivals filled the calendar, offerings appeared constantly, gods watched over everything, or at least that was the theory. Romans had gods for war, gods for agriculture, gods for love, gods for trade, gods for the home, gods for crossroads, gods for luck. Quite a comprehensive system, really. If something existed, there was probably a god connected to it. Our slave girl grows up within this religious world. Perhaps she participates in household rituals. Perhaps she whispers private prayers. Perhaps she asks the gods for protection or health or freedom or simply a better tomorrow. Human beings have always carried their hopes into prayer. The details change, the impulse remains. And for someone with little control over life, prayer may offer a sense of connection, a feeling that someone somewhere is listening. Whether divine intervention arrives is another question entirely. History suggests the gods often maintained mysterious schedules. As evening approaches, something unexpected happens, nothing dramatic, nothing cinematic, simply kindness. One of the household women notices our girl's hard work, offers an extra piece of bread, a kind word, a small gesture, And perhaps that seems insignificant, but kindness becomes surprisingly powerful in difficult circumstances. People remember it, years later, decades later, sometimes for an entire lifetime, because kindness interrupts suffering, even briefly, especially briefly. Our girl accepts the gesture gratefully, and for a moment, the day feels lighter, not perfect, not transformed, just lighter. One of the misconceptions people sometimes have about history is that lives were either entirely miserable or entirely happy. Real life rarely works that way. Most lives contain mixtures, good moments and bad moments, hope and disappointment, laughter and sadness. The same was true in ancient Rome. The same was true for slaves. Even difficult lives contained moments of joy. And even privileged lives contained moments of pain. Human experience tends to resist simple categories. As darkness falls across the city, the household settles once more. Lamps flicker softly, conversations quiet. The day's work finally ends. Our girl lies down to sleep, tired as always. But tonight she carries something unusual into the darkness. A little hope, a little friendship, a little reminder that life contains more than labor alone, not enough to solve her problems. Not enough to grant freedom, but enough to make tomorrow seem slightly easier. And sometimes that is how people survive difficult years, not through grand victories, not through dramatic transformations, but through small moments, a kind word, a shared laugh, a trusted friend, a dream that refuses to disappear. Outside, Rome glows beneath the stars, the empire continues, the senators scheme, the merchants trade, the soldiers march. The slaves sleep, and somewhere among them, a young woman drifts into dreams, dreams of freedom, dreams of family, dreams of a future that may yet arrive. And as the ancient city settles into another quiet night, our story gently continues onward. The sun rises once again over Rome. By now, the rhythm of our slave girl's life feels familiar. Wake before dawn, work until exhausted, sleep, repeat. The cycle turns like a wheel, slowly, relentlessly. And yet beneath that routine, something has begun to grow. A dream, not a dramatic dream, not the sort of dream that inspires armies or changes history. A quieter dream, the dream of freedom. For many slaves in the Roman world, freedom was not just an abstract idea. It was a real possibility, a distant possibility perhaps, but a possibility nonetheless. And that small distinction mattered enormously. Because unlike some slave systems throughout history, Roman slavery occasionally allowed pathways to freedom. Not easy pathways, not guaranteed pathways, but pathways. A loyal servant might be freed by a grateful owner. A skilled worker might save enough money. A household favorite might receive emancipation through a will. The opportunities varied, the uncertainty remained, but hope survived, and hope can be surprisingly stubborn. Our girl thinks about this often now. Not every day, she rarely has time for that. But whenever she hears stories of former slaves building new lives, she listens carefully. Perhaps she hears about a freedwoman running a small business. Perhaps she hears about a former slave who purchased a modest house. Perhaps she hears about someone who married and raised children as a free citizen. These stories travel through servant networks like treasured secrets, partly because they are inspiring, partly because they prove freedom is possible, and partly because every difficult life needs something to look toward. Without hope, even small hardships become heavier. With hope, people can endure astonishing things. Now let's drift gently into the marketplace. Today our girl has been sent on errands, a common task. The household requires supplies, food, oil, fabric, the endless list of things that keep Roman life functioning. The market is crowded as always. Rome seems permanently crowded. People push through narrow streets. Merchants advertise goods. Customers argue over prices. Animals wander wherever they please. Children run through spaces that seem far too small for running. The entire city feels alive. And as she moves through the crowd, our girl notices something. Freedmen, former slaves, they're everywhere, not dominant, not wealthy aristocrats, but visible shopkeepers, craftsmen, merchants, ordinary people conducting ordinary business. A reminder that life after slavery can exist. Rome, for all its flaws, created strange social possibilities. A slave might become free, a freed person might become successful, their children might become citizens, their grandchildren might rise even further. The system remained unequal, often brutally unequal, yet mobility existed, enough to keep dreams alive. Our girl watches these former slaves carefully, not because they are famous, but because they represent possibility. Every one of them is evidence that a different future might exist. And sometimes possibility is enough to carry someone through another difficult week or another difficult year. Back at the household, life continues as usual. The mistress worries about family matters. The children create new problems. The master complains about politics. A senator somewhere makes a speech. A merchant somewhere counts money. The empire continues moving forward, and yet our girl's perspective is changing. She has spent years observing Roman society, years watching powerful people, years watching wealthy people, and she is beginning to notice something surprising. Many free people are not particularly happy. A shocking discovery. One might assume wealth solves everything. History repeatedly suggests otherwise. The rich worry about losing money. The powerful worry about losing influence. The famous worry about reputation. The ambitious worry about failure. Everyone seems worried about something, even emperors, especially emperors, actually. Roman history contains a remarkable number of unhappy emperors, an impressive achievement considering they controlled vast territories. Our girl notices this, and perhaps it teaches her something important. Freedom does not guarantee happiness, but lacking freedom certainly makes happiness harder. The distinction matters. Now let's float quietly toward evening. The household has guests again, not a grand banquet this time, just visitors, friends, relatives, the sort of gathering where people exchange news, discuss marriages, complain about politics, and gossip enthusiastically. Humanity has always enjoyed gossip. The technology changes, the gossip remains. As servants move through the room, our girl overhears a conversation. One guest mentions a recently freed slave. Another discusses a wealthy freedman who donated money to a local temple. Someone else complains that former slaves are becoming too successful. A complaint that appears frequently throughout history whenever previously disadvantaged people begin improving their circumstances. Apparently, some traditions are eternal. The conversation drifts elsewhere, but our girl keeps thinking about it. Freedom. Again, the idea follows her everywhere now, not as a fantasy, as a possibility, a distant star, still far away, still difficult to reach, yet visible. And visibility changes everything. When people cannot imagine a better future, despair becomes easier. When they can imagine one, endurance becomes possible. This may be one of the reasons hope has survived throughout human history. Hope is practical. Hope helps people continue. Hope helps people wake up tomorrow. Now the evening grows darker. The visitors depart. The household quiets. And our girl finds herself in the courtyard once more, a place she has come to love. Not because it belongs to her. Nothing here belongs to her. But because it offers a few moments of peace. Above her, the stars appear. The same stars her ancestors saw, the same stars we see today. Empires rise beneath them, empires fall beneath them. Yet the stars remain largely unimpressed. There is something comforting about that. Rome feels enormous, powerful, permanent. Yet even Rome will someday disappear. though nobody living here knows that yet, least of all our slave girl. She simply sits quietly beneath the night sky, thinking, dreaming, remembering. Perhaps she imagines owning a small home someday. Perhaps she imagines choosing her own work. Perhaps she imagines waking up without orders, waiting, simple dreams, ordinary dreams, yet profoundly meaningful, because they belong to her. No law can prevent that. No master can fully control that. Dreams occupy strange territory, difficult to measure, difficult to own, difficult to destroy. And so she keeps dreaming, night after night, year after year. The dream grows stronger, not louder, not dramatic, just steady, like a candle protected from the wind. And as Rome settles into darkness once more, our young slave woman drifts towards sleep, still unfree, still uncertain, still trapped within a system she did not choose, but carrying something powerful into the future, the belief that life might someday be different. And for tonight, that belief is enough. The lamps fade, the city grows quiet, and beneath the stars of the Roman Empire, another chapter of her long journey comes gently to an end. The morning begins like every other morning. Which is exactly why nobody notices that it is different. History rarely announces itself. There are no dramatic sound effects, no mysterious music, no glowing signs hanging in the sky. Most life-changing moments arrive disguised as ordinary days. And today appears completely ordinary. Our slave girl wakes before dawn, she dresses, she begins her chores. The household slowly comes alive around her. Everything feels familiar, predictable, routine. Yet somewhere beyond the walls of the house, events are quietly moving. And before the day is over, her future may look slightly different, not completely different. History rarely works that way, but different enough. Let's move slowly through the morning. The master of the household is older now. Time has been passing, not dramatically, just steadily, as time always does. The children she once cared for are no longer really children. One is approaching adulthood. Another has become interested in politics. A third has discovered the universal teenage hobby of believing they know everything. Ancient Rome apparently produced teenagers just as effectively as the modern world. The years have changed everyone, including our girl, though perhaps we should stop calling her a girl. She is a young woman now, her face is older, her hands show years of labor, her movements are confident, experienced. She knows the household better than some family members do. She knows where everything belongs. She knows every routine, every habit, every personality. In many ways, she has become essential. An invisible pillar holding part of the household together. And that creates an interesting problem, because valuable slaves occupied a strange position. Owners depended on them, trusted them, sometimes even respected them, yet still owned them. A contradiction that Roman society largely accepted. Humans are surprisingly comfortable living alongside contradictions. Now let's drift toward midday. A visitor arrives, nothing unusual there. Roman houses received visitors constantly. Business associates, friends, relatives, political allies, people who wanted favors, people who wanted money, people who wanted influence. The usual collection. Today's visitor, however, brings news involving inheritance, news involving property, news involving the future. And suddenly the household grows unusually attentive. Romans loved inheritance discussions. The topic combined wealth, status, family drama, and legal arguments. Essentially all of Rome's favorite hobbies at once. The conversation unfolds behind closed doors. Our young woman hears fragments, only fragments, enough to know something important is happening, not enough to know exactly what, which is often how ordinary people experience major events, bits and pieces, rumors, half-understood conversations. History from the outside can look clear. Living through it rarely feels that way. As the day continues, whispers spread among the servants. Someone heard the master discussing his will. Someone heard talk about future arrangements. Someone else claims to know details, though that person also claimed last month that a senator was secretly a pirate. So perhaps caution is wise, still the rumors persist. And with rumors comes speculation, because servants understand something important. Changes at the top often affect everyone below. A new master could mean new rules, new expectations, new opportunities, or new problems nobody knows, and uncertainty begins filling the household. A young woman feels it too. She has spent years here, most of her life perhaps. The house is not home, not really, yet it is familiar. Familiarity has its own kind of comfort. Even difficult places become predictable over time, and predictability can feel reassuring. Now let's float gently into the evening. The household gathers for dinner. The atmosphere feels different, quieter, thoughtful. The master seems tired, older than before. Perhaps age is catching up with him, perhaps illness. Perhaps simply the weight of years. Ancient Rome was not especially forgiving to aging bodies. Medical science still had a long journey ahead. The family speaks softly, the servants work quietly, and for a brief moment our young woman notices something unusual. The master looks at her, not as a servant, not entirely, more like someone remembering, someone reflecting. After all, she has been part of this household for years. He remembers her as a child, remembers her learning routines, growing older, helping raise his children, managing responsibilities, remaining loyal, reliable, present. History contains many examples of people who spent decades standing quietly in the background, people who became so familiar that others stopped noticing them, until one day they suddenly realized how much depended on them. Perhaps this is one of those moments, perhaps not, but something shifts just slightly, and sometimes slight shifts matter. The evening ends, the household settles, the stars appear overhead. And later that night, long after most people are asleep, conversation continues behind closed doors. The master speaks with family members, names are mentioned, instructions discussed, future plans considered. Our young woman knows none of the details, yet she senses change approaching, not because of any specific evidence, simply because life feels different. Humans are surprisingly good at noticing when the air changes, when routines begin bending, when the future quietly approaches. Now let's pause for a moment and think about wills, a surprisingly exciting topic, well, exciting by Roman standards. Perhaps mildly interesting is more accurate. Roman wills could include instructions about slaves. Sometimes slaves were left to heirs, sometimes sold, sometimes rewarded, and occasionally freed. Manumission through a will was not uncommon. Many slaves dreamed about it, many never received it, but the possibility remained, and possibilities have a way of surviving inside people's minds. Even when reality remains uncertain, our young woman lies awake longer than usual tonight, listening to distant sounds, thinking about rumors, thinking about years gone by, thinking about the future. The strange thing about hope is that it becomes stronger once it attaches itself to something concrete. For years, freedom was an abstract dream. Now it feels slightly closer, still distant, still uncertain, but closer. And that makes sleep difficult, not because she is afraid, because she is imagining. Imagining choices, imagining ownership, imagining tomorrow belonging to her. A dangerous activity in some ways. Hope always carries risk. The future might disappoint, the dream might fail, the opportunity might never arrive. Yet people continue hopping anyway, generation after generation, century after century, perhaps because the alternative is worse. Outside, Rome sleeps beneath the stars. The empire continues its endless motion. Ships cross the Mediterranean. Soldiers guard distant borders. Senators argue. Merchants trade, children grow older, and somewhere in a quiet room, a young woman who has spent most of her life in service waits for whatever comes next. She does not know it yet, but the long years of labor, the endless chores, the patient endurance, the countless ordinary days may finally be leading somewhere, not a miracle, not a fairy tale. History rarely provides either, but perhaps something better, a chance. And for tonight, that possibility drifts softly beside her into sleep. The city grows silent. The lamps burn low. The next morning arrives slowly. Soft sunlight creeps across the rooftops of Rome. The city stretches awake. Merchants prepare their stalls. Bakers begin their work. Wagons rumble through narrow streets, and our young slave woman rises from her bed after a restless night. She had hoped sleep might quiet her thoughts. Instead, her thoughts spent most of the night quietly refusing to cooperate, an experience familiar to humans across every century. Sometimes the body is tired, but the mind decides to host a meeting, and nobody gets any rest. Today she moves through her duties as usual, sweeping floors, carrying water, preparing household items. Everything looks normal, everything feels normal, yet beneath the surface she waits, because waiting is one of the hardest forms of labor. Physical work is exhausting, but uncertainty can be exhausting in its own way, especially when the future seems close enough to touch, and yet remains completely out of reach. The rumors about the masters will continue. Nobody knows the details. Everyone claims to know the details. These are not the same thing. One servant insists several household slaves will be freed. Another claims everyone will simply be transferred to the eldest son. A third claims to possess secret information, which almost certainly means they possess no information whatsoever. Human beings have always enjoyed pretending to know more than they actually do. Rome was no exception. Our young woman listens quietly. Years of service have taught her patience. Speculation changes nothing. The future arrives on its own schedule, not hers, not anyone else's, and so she waits. The morning drifts onward, tasks fill the hours, the familiar rhythm of household life continues, yet something feels different now. For years, her life moved in predictable circles. Today, she finds herself imagining straight lines, a future, a destination, a possibility. Hope has changed her perspective, not dramatically, just enough. And sometimes just enough changes everything. Let's float gently into the afternoon. The master is resting. His health appears weaker than before. Age sits heavily upon him. He walks more slowly, speaks more softly, needs assistance more often. Our young woman notices these things because she notices everything. Years of service have sharpened her attention. Servants become experts at observation. They learn to recognize moods before words are spoken, needs before requests are made, problems before they fully emerge. It is a valuable skill, and often an invisible one. As she helps arrange his room, she notices him studying old family documents, letters, records, memories preserved on parchment, the accumulated evidence of a long life. There is something strangely universal about this moment. People grow older and eventually begin looking backward, reviewing their lives, remembering choices. Successes, mistakes, relationships, regrets. The centuries change, the impulse remains. The master says little, but his expression seems thoughtful, perhaps even reflective. And for the first time in many years, he asks her a question, a simple question about her family, about where she came from, about what she remembers. The conversation is brief, yet unusual. Because servants were often expected to listen rather than speak, our young woman answers respectfully, carefully, and afterward she returns to work. But the exchange lingers in her thoughts. Perhaps it means nothing. Perhaps it means something. The uncertainty continues. Now the afternoon heat settles over Rome. The city slows slightly, not completely. Rome never completely slows, but enough. Workers seek shade, animals rest. Even the noise seems softer. In the courtyard, a few servants gather briefly during a break. The conversation turns toward freedom once again. It often does. One older servant tells a story about a man he once knew, a slave who spent 20 years serving a merchant, patiently, faithfully waiting. Then one day freedom finally arrived, not because of luck, not because of drama, simply because time passed and promises were kept. The story contains no great adventure, no dramatic escape, no heroic speeches. Which makes it more believable. Real life rarely resembles legends. Most meaningful changes arrive quietly, like seasons, slowly enough that people barely notice until everything looks different. Our young woman listens carefully, because stories matter, especially stories about survival, especially stories about possibility. Human beings often navigate difficult circumstances by borrowing strength from other people's experiences. A reminder that someone else endured, someone else succeeded. Someone else found a way forward. Now evening approaches once more. The household gathers for dinner. The atmosphere remains subdued. The master's health remains uncertain. Conversations are shorter, laughter less frequent. Even the children seem unusually aware that something is changing. Families often sense these things before anyone says them aloud. And households, like living creatures, respond to change. As darkness falls, a young woman completes her final duties. The lamps are lit, the rooms arranged. The task's finished. For now, there are always more tasks tomorrow. But tomorrow has not arrived yet. And tonight she finds herself sitting once again beneath the stars, her favorite place, or perhaps simply the place that feels most peaceful. The sky above Rome stretches endlessly clear, ancient, indifferent, the same sky that watched over emperors, the same sky that watched over slaves. The stars show no preference. There is something oddly comforting about that. She thinks about the years behind her. The endless mornings, the heavy water jars, the banquet preparations, the children she helped raise, the friendships she formed, the losses she endured. So much of life has passed inside these walls, and yet the future remains unwritten. For the first time, that thought feels exciting rather than frightening, because an unwritten future contains possibilities, and possibilities contain hope, not certainty, hope. The two are different. History teaches that lesson repeatedly. Nothing is guaranteed, not wealth, not power, not freedom, not tomorrow. Yet people continue planning, continue dreaming, continue hoping, and perhaps that is one of humanity's greatest talents. Outside the household, Rome settles into night. Somewhere senators discuss politics, somewhere merchants count profits, somewhere lovers make promises, somewhere children dream, and somewhere beneath the vast Roman sky, a woman who has spent most of her life waiting continues to wait, not passively, not hopelessly, patiently. The answer has not arrived yet, but she senses it drawing nearer, like dawn before sunrise, still hidden, yet unmistakably approaching. And so she closes her eyes. The city grows quiet. The stars continue their slow journey overhead, and another chapter of her life slips gently into history. The morning arrives cool and gray, not dramatically gray. Rome rarely cared about dramatic symbolism. The clouds simply drift overhead, while the city continues doing what cities always do. People wake up. People work, people worry, people eat breakfast. And somewhere, without fail, somebody makes a questionable decision before noon. Human history would be considerably shorter without questionable decisions. Our young woman begins her day as usual. At least she tries to. The familiar chores are waiting. The floors have somehow become dirty again. The water jars need filling. The household requires attention. Everything appears normal. Yet normal has become increasingly difficult to believe. Because the master is dying, not suddenly, not violently, simply gradually, the way many people did in the ancient world, one season blending into the next, strength fading, movement slowing, the quiet approach of old age. And everyone in the house knows it. Nobody says it directly, But everyone knows, the children know, the servants know, the family knows, even the household dog probably knows. Animals often seem strangely aware of such things. The atmosphere throughout the house has changed. Voices are softer. Conversations shorter. The future feels closer. And the future, unfortunately, has a habit of arriving whether people are prepared or not. For our young woman, the uncertainty has become almost unbearable, not because she expects miracles. Years of service have taught her not to expect miracles, but because she no longer knows where her life is heading. Will she remain here? Will she be sold, transferred, freed? The possibilities circle endlessly through her thoughts, and yet no answers arrive, only waiting. Maury waiting. History contains many stories about battles, many stories about kings, many stories about great victories. Far fewer stories are written about waiting. Yet waiting occupies an enormous portion of human life, waiting for news, waiting for change, waiting for opportunities, waiting for answers. Our young woman understands this deeply. Now let's drift gently forward several weeks. Time passes. The seasons continue their slow march, and eventually the day arrives, the day everyone feared. The master dies quietly, at home, surrounded by family, no dramatic last speech, no famous final words destined for history books. Most people don't receive those. Most lives end the way they were lived, quietly, ordinarily, humanly. The household falls into mourning, family members cry, servants whisper, visitors arrive, messages are sent. The routines of death begin. And ancient Rome had many routines surrounding death. Romans understood mortality very well. Death was familiar, common, expected. Yet familiarity does not make loss easier. People still grieve, always have, always will. Our young woman grieves too, which might seem surprising. After all, he was her owner, the man who legally possessed her. Yet human relationships are rarely simple. She spent years in this household, years serving him, years watching his children grow, years sharing the same daily world. People become part of each other's lives, even under unequal circumstances, especially under unequal circumstances. And now that chapter has ended, the house feels different, emptier somehow, a little quieter, a little stranger, like a familiar song missing several notes. Now comes the moment everyone has been anticipating, the reading of the will, a remarkably Roman event. Nothing captured Roman priorities quite like gathering people together to discuss property. The family assembles, relatives arrive, legal officials appear, documents are prepared, everyone waits, including the servants, especially the servants. Because their futures may be written inside those pages. Imagine standing nearby while someone reads a document that could determine the rest of your life. No pressure, just your entire future hanging in the balance. Our young woman waits, heart racing, trying to remain calm, trying not to imagine possibilities, trying and failing. The reading begins. Property is distributed, land, money, household items, investments. Everything receives careful attention. Romans loved organization, at least when money was involved. Names are mentioned, instructions delivered, and slowly the future unfolds. Then comes the section concerning household slaves. The room grows quieter, servants listen carefully, some stare at the floor, others glance nervously toward family members. No one wants to appear too interested, yet everyone is interested. The document continues. Several slaves are assigned to heirs, others remain attached to household properties. A few receive special instructions, and then our young woman's name is spoken. For a moment, everything seems to stop, not dramatically, just internally, the way time slows during important moments. The words arrive, simple words, legal words, words written on parchment, yet powerful enough to change an entire life. She is to be freed, not immediately wealthy, not transformed into an aristocrat, not handed a palace overlooking the Mediterranean. History remains stubbornly realistic, but free, legally free. The room continues listening to the will. the reading continues. Life continues, yet for her everything has changed. The strange thing about life-changing moments is how ordinary they often appear from the outside. Nobody bursts into applause, trumpets do not sound, the sky remains exactly where it was. The city continues functioning, merchants continue selling goods, children continue causing trouble, dogs continue barking at inappropriate times, the world remains the same. Yet her world has changed completely. After years of waiting, years of hopping, years of imagining, the answer has finally arrived: freedom, a word she has carried inside her mind for so long that it almost feels unreal. And now it belongs to her, at least legally. Emotionally, it will take time. Because freedom is not simply a legal status, it is also a habit, a mindset, a way of seeing the future, and habits formed over many years do not disappear overnight. Still, the first step has happened, the boundary has been crossed, the impossible has become real. That evening she sits alone beneath the stars once more, the same courtyard, the same sky, the same city, yet everything feels different. Rome stretches around her as it always has, massive, crowded, complicated, beautiful, cruel, human. The empire remains unchanged, but she does not. For the first time in her life, tomorrow belongs to her, not completely. Life never belongs completely to anyone, but more than before, much more. And as she gazes upward at the stars, she realizes something strange. The dream that sustained her for so many years is no longer a dream. It has become reality, which means tomorrow brings a different question. Not will I be free, but what happens next? And beneath the vast night sky of ancient Rome, with the city glowing softly around her, a newly freed woman begins wondering about the rest of her life, a future that is finally her own.